Hey everyone, just a few quick things before we get started. Don't forget to sign the attendance sheet. It's just real simple. Just ask you 2 questions. Kind of looks like this. But that's pretty much it. Please enjoy. Hope you all learned something.
Okay, so in today's video, we're going to be going over if statements, relational operators, and nested if statements. Let's get started. So the first question I have is, what are the relational operators? So these are going to be real simple. To start off with, we're going to have like a greater than sign and a less than sign. Alright, but we still got like greater than or equal to, right? So we got to do, so the trick is like greater than, and then equals to, you add an equal sign. And it's going to be the same thing with less than. Pretty simple once you know it. And so now we gotta do for an equals, right, to check to see if something's equal. We can't just use one equal sign because that's assigned stuff. So if you have if x equals 3, x is always going to be equal to 3 because you're assigning it to be in that line. So the way to check you see if something's equal is equals equals, right? So you have if x equals 3, that's the check until you check it. Alright, and the next one we have is going to be not equals. And so we're going to represent this using an exclamation point and a equal sign. And so we use these a lot in if statements. Speaking of, we have this question right here. What is an if statement? And so an if statement is a way to create branches in your code, right? So if you have multiple pathways, to create multiple pathways, right? Because not everything can just run perfectly, so you have to like check stuff, use these to compare. Next question I have is, when should you use the if statement? And so use an if statement when you need to check something. And it's going to be formatted with if, right? Open parentheses, the expression you want to have, close parentheses. I think it's only one, maybe it's two. And then brackets. And so this is going to be another case where we use brackets. But you see there's no semicolons in here, only if you have stuff inside the brackets. The next question I have is, when should you use the if-else statement? And how is it formatted? So you should use the if-else statement when you have like multiple options, right? So example, if it's like an or, right? If you have like, if this happens, then this needs to happen. But if it doesn't happen, then this needs to happen. And then else you can continue with your code. Which I'll explain a little bit more after we write it down. So you're gonna have an if, an expression, brackets, and then else, no expression, right? And then brackets. I'm just gonna put this on a new page. So like this. But yeah, so for example, if x is positive, print out x is positive, else print out x is negative. And then like you can continue on with the rest of your code, right? So it's for when the two different options result in two different outcomes. Outcomes. Okay, and so how does else if work? So else if works kind of like the if else statement. So like let's just pretend like we copy this, paste it here. And so the only difference is you have this extra else if, and this comes with another expression, right? expression 2 and has its own brackets and everything. And so you should use this when there are more than two options. And so you don't have to limit yourself to if, else, if, else. You could do if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else. You know, you could have a lot of these if you needed to. And so how it works would be like, if this expression is true, then this code will get ran. If it's not, it's going to skip over the code within the brackets. If it was just an if statement, it'd just continue on with the rest of the code. If it's an if else, it would run this else code, even if, okay, so like this, right? So if this was false, it would skip over this and then run the else code and then continue on with the rest of the code. For an if else if, it'll do, if this is false, it'll skip it. If this is true, it'll run whatever here, and then it won't run that, right? So this only gets run if the other two options are false. And also only one option will ever be run at a time. If this is true, then these other two aren't run. And if this is true, then those two aren't run, and so forth. Neither of these is true, then that one's run. Alright, the next question I have is, what is a nested if statement? A nested if statement is one if statement inside another if statement. And it's going to look something like this. You have if, and then your expression. Then inside that if statement, we have a second if with a new expression with its own conditions and its own bounds. Like that. And so when should you use a nested if statement? You should use a nested if when you need to check multiple things for one pathway. For example, if you were trying to see that something is a square, right? You could do if 4 right angles, and then you could do if all sides are equal. And then so in this case, you could have it is a square. But then you can even have an else under this if statement, but within this big if statement, it says else is a rectangle. Or whatever you were testing. What are Boolean operators? So these are going to be used in if statements. The first one is going to be this double and it's going to represent and. And the next one is two straight lines, and it's going to represent or. And so these work for combined if statements. For example, you could have a if expression 1 and expression 2, right? So this is only going to be true and pass if both expression 1 and expression 2 are true. If even one of them is false, it won't run. However, if you were using the ors, you could, if any one of these is true, it won't run. And so it only won't run when both of these are false, but any other time it's going to run true. And for the and again, it's only going to run when both of these are true. The last question I have is, which is more efficient, an if statement with multiple Boolean operators, like this, or a nested if? And the answer is going to be a nested if, because this is always going to have to check both expressions, while if this one's false, it never has to check this one, right? So you can skip it and move on. So it's going to make it more efficient. Okay. And so here I have the code, and I'm going to open up Online GDB so we can do some of that. Okay, so here I have Online GDB opened up, so let's get started. The first thing it does is ask the user for a number. So we can do cout, please enter a number. And then we'll create an integer called num, and then we'll take the num as an input from the user using cin. And now the next thing we need to do is check to see if this number is even. So we're checking something, right? So we need an if statement. So if, open parentheses, num. So it's going to be even if it's divisible by 2, right? Which means there's no decimal. So how we do this is by doing mod 2 is equal to 0, right? Because if it's not even, there will be a remainder of 1. But if it is even, there will be no remainder. And then so in here, we can print out your number is even. Alright? And so the next thing to do is ask user for a second number. So we'll add an integer up here, num2, cout, enter in another number, and then cin again, num2. And so now with this other number, we need to check to see if it's positive or negative. And if it's positive, we should divide it by 2. So we're checking, right? So if num2 is positive, so greater than 0, wrong kind of brackets there. Cout your number is positive. And then cout your number divided by 2 is, and we'll just go over here and we'll do num2 divided by 2, and then we'll end the line. Okay? And else if it's negative, we can do, let's do an else if, right? Because if it's not negative, then it's just equal to 0. So test num2 is less than 0. And we can do cout your number is negative. Okay, and then we can just do an else cout your number is 0, right? Because it's not positive and it's not negative, then it's 0. Okay, and so this takes care of that. But to use an I want to show you how to use like a nested if. So let's pretend we want to make sure it's even first before we do that. So we'll come down here, if, like we did earlier, right? If num2 mod 2 is equal to 0, then when it's positive, right? Then you could do see out your number divided by 2 is blah, blah, blah. But let's say if it's false, so else, see out your number is not even. Alright, and let's run it and see what we get. Alright, so the first number I'm going to enter in is going to be an even number, so enter in 6. Great, so that prints out your number 6. So another even number, we'll start with a positive number divided by 2 as well, so we'll do 4 this time. It's positive, and your number divided by 2 is 2. Great. So let's run it again with some different things. So you can see here we didn't have an if statement, so if we enter in an odd number for the first time, it's not going to do anything, and it's just going to run the second thing. So enter in another number, so let's do a positive number, but one that's not divided by 2. So 7. The number is positive, but it's not even. Alright, and so we'll just skip the first one. And then let's try a negative number. Negative 7. Alright, and so the only other option is going to be a 0. So the funny thing is, if you enter in 0, it will say the number is even. Because it is. And then enter another number 0, it says your number is 0. So it works perfectly, and that's about it that I have for this code. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by my office hours.
Thank you all for making it all the way through this video. Here's a little way of saying thank you.